Hi, and welcome to another episode of Radio Free Golgotha's glorious podcasting.
Yes. Hi.
Hello.
We are trying an experiment today after a ill-fated canomus and a very large, long episode that is actually in two parts right now that is being edited. And I might cut this out anyway. Our experiment for today is that rather than predict the day of the saint we are talking on, we're going to try recording on the feast of the saint as an alternative to, oh my God, I have to get this edited. It has to be after night or it won't work. So we are both busy boys and also have a horrible problem of talking to each other a lot about things other than the podcast. So we are already cutting our own personal conversations short so that we can do St. Mary of Egypt honor today.
Mm-hmm.
If you haven't checked out our website at radiofreegolgotha.com, please do. We do have useful, fun links up there, including whatever tea I'm drinking and probably will have to write down. Also know that we do have notes, I believe, for at least the first episode.
I think they're finished. I don't know if they're up.
We will have notes on this and other episodes very soon.
Mm-hmm.
But we finally cracked the hack or something on that.
Mm-hmm.
Happy spring to everyone. It is halfway through Lent, roughly. Mm-hmm. No, a little bit late, more than halfway. Dear God, Lent's almost over.
Mm.
Wow. Okay. Shows you that I am not here on this earth.
Time flies when you're in a desert.
Time flies when you're being pursued by the devil.
So this episode today is going to be brought to you by predominantly Mary of Egypt, for she is dear to Jesse's heart, and I'm always happy to hear about saints that I don't necessarily know an awful lot about, including this Mary. Also, hopefully, we'll be touching upon Oudh and Aloeswood as our plant. We'll be talking about Obsidian as our stone, our mineral, hopefully extensively. There's plenty to say about that. In theory, we will be talking about the Tiresias as our dead magician. The Hermit is our tarot card. Dirt sorcery is our means of magic. And potentially we'll be talking about Carcer and Odí,
mm-hmm.
as well as the geomantic figures and the Odú Odí that we'll be comparing and contrasting. Oh, yes, and our demon of the week is Khil from the Grimorium Verum, and their corollary counterpart in Kimbanda, which is 7 waterfalls.
Sete Cachoeiras.
Mm-hmm.
So starting with Mary, she is the patron of Lent, the great fast in Eastern Orthodoxy. Wow. She's a little bit lesser known in Catholicism, although her feast is today, April 3rd, which is why we are recording today. And I think the interesting thing about her is that we know about her because of a priest meeting her later on in her life and going back the following year, I believe, and finding her passed away, finding her body and burying her with the help of a passing lion, which I think is fantastic. But the story goes,
a friend of the beasts kind of thing.
Yes.
Right.
And there's a great doxology that's on YouTube that I'll link to that explains the story of Mary of Egypt, sung in, I believe it's a Coptic style, in English though, so you can actually hear the entire narrative chanted, which is really beautiful. But she, I believe, was, I want to say, born in Alexandria, and went to the Holy Land either as a prostitute or wanting to become a prostitute to seduce pilgrims, because she was possessed of many demons and liked rolling in the mud. And when she got to the Holy Land, after, I think probably convincing a few people to go that way, she tried to enter the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, and the image of the Theotokos, the image of Mary holding Jesus that is above the door, the entrance to the church, she could not pass it. And this provoked her. And she had a crisis of faith. And, lo and behold, different versions, but she went into the desert with 2.5 loaves of bread, which is depicted as 3, and some black cloth, and went out into the desert and was never seen again except by this one priest later on in her life. And she was said that, or she is said to have fed on desert creatures and honey and dates and things like that, locusts. The priest talked about how she could levitate, bilocate, walk across water. She is a desert mother. There are many desert fathers. There are not as many desert mothers. And the praise poems of her are really gorgeous. One of my favorite parts of one that I quote on the scroll that we have in the store for her is, what smells so awesome in the wilderness, as beautiful incense in a chest of the temple, that Mary breathes, with holiness she exudes. So it basically is saying, what's that smell? It's Mary. But as for a woman in the desert, you'd expect something horrific and sun-drenched skin. But she is associated with sweet desert smells, specifically oud and honey and things like that nourish. She is considered an oasis of a saint. She does not reject anyone because she was so enraptured with what she thought was her purpose, which was to be a channel for lust, and to get her fill in that way, to be the repository. And instead she became, I think it was, rather than finding her fill, she went on an effort to find her peace, which is what the Virgin Mary said to her at the Theotokos, which I think was, cross the river Jordan and you will find peace, enter the desert. Don't stay around people. That people are a distraction for you and you have a greater purpose. It is interesting that she, when she saw the priest, she wanted communion. He comes back and the lion is the one that helps the priest bury her. So she tames the beast within, the carnal lust, which I think is interesting if we look at the Crowleyan lust card or the strength card, the woman holding the lion's jaws.
Right. Through her chastity. Yeah.
And that's similar. There's obviously some common language being spoken here. Because it was with many saints. No idea if this saint actually existed, but the story has been beloved for a very long time and is an old story. Right.
The sources are mainly, it seems, all derived from Saint Sophronius. Is that what it said? The Patriarch of Jerusalem, who's 7th century. So not that much longer after her, like 200, 300 years is all.
Yeah. Which in that time period, there were a lot of hermits in the desert. Like, it wasn't unheard of. So the likelihood that this may actually be based on a real woman is much higher than the average saint story.
Right.
There is some contention that really she's just a conflation with Mary Magdalene and from some iconography, because of Mary Magdalene's depiction of long hair that she washed Jesus's feet with, that some icons of Mary Magdalene do show her with feet down to the ankles but nude, which enhances the reputation that she later gained and was kind of codified of being the Holy Harlot, which was not as universal in the early church.
Right.
That Mary of Egypt herself also wearing a hair shirt, that she's depicted often in icons floating above the desert with her hair as her only clothing, which is pretty profound in that way. But going into the desert with 3 loaves in black cloth, I don't know. The reason why I like her is just she's so accepting. She doesn't turn anyone away. And there are a lot of saints where there's this kind of need for someone to feel pure or feel like they have to be embarrassed by it. And, the Virgin Mary is often one of those ones that people still want to go to, but they hide from her in shame in traditional Catholicism. Like, let's put the kerchief over her while I'm changing so I don't want her to see me naked. Mary of Egypt has seen everything, and she just doesn't care. She's more interested and used and called on to help people refine themselves as the patron of Lent, to kind of steer you away from your distractions. Like, how do you find your true north again? And I think there's something in that as this woman becomes the patron of Lent itself is pretty profound, because Lent is a pretty profound thing.
Right.
Things that I know that I like to go to her for, motivation, perseverance. There is a sense of clairvoyance with her. To protect the outcast or the abused is a famous thing to do with her. In general, it's just, there's some beautiful works that can be done with her. I'll see if I can. Penitent, wonderful, self-tormentor, oh yes, sinful me by passion darkened. Passions are beasts which eat at our heart, in us are serpents, secretly they weave a nest. Oh yes, sinful me by passion consumed. Hearken to the cry of Mary, of all the most sinful. Her darkened soul he whitened as snow, filled it to overflowing with your grace. And Mary became radiant with the Spirit as an angel of God, by strength girded, by your power, O Christ, mercy most pure. What smells so awesome, or what smells so in the awesome wilderness, as beautiful incense in a chest of the temple, that Mary breathes, with holiness she exudes. It's an Eastern Orthodox hymn. It's the full thing. So calling her the most sinful. And also because she's Mary of Egypt, there is this interesting thing of the blackening. So it's black cloth that she goes in there. It's just a little bit of bread, calling to mind the black soil of Alchem,
right.
of Egypt itself.
Mm-hmm.
And again, here the most sinful, the most blackened exudes. So it's there's so much that comes to mind with that. But there's a book I'm reading right now. It talks about the painting, the pigments in Nigeria and Orisha land.
Mm-hmm.
And in the diaspora, we associate Owatala with just gleaming white. We use enamel and just this titanium whiteness.
Mm-hmm.
Yoruba land, you paint the walls black so that the Efun patterns that you draw on it will stand out more. So there's this prayer to make me as black as possible so my character stands out better, which is an amazing affirmation of a black people, of a black deity, of this, the positivity of blackness.
Right. So that that Sir William stuff about the darkness represents not fear, but the unknown and the exploration of it, and we trust that the moon shall guide us. Mm-hmm. Right. So you got all that kind of biz, which is interesting, and then the notion of Dudu, right, of the black ashe being what's the phrase you used that one time, but the water, the still water at midnight.
Yeah, the water at midnight. Yeah. Black soil. You don't know if the soil is going to bear fruit or if it's going to, your seed is going to go to shit in it.
Right.
And it's unknown. It's a mediating force, and it's actually fairly stable as far as things go. White and red are scarier. This heated force and this cooling force, and you need a balance of them, the Semen and the Menses forces, to really play into the blackness of time and space, the blackness of the womb. Right,
the receptivity and the potentia, if we want to go an Aristotelian metaphysic route. Yeah, definitely this kind of, and that sense of not just so the white stands out, but so the black gets to do its the thing it can do of receiving something and making it more something growing from it as well.
Yeah, that black is, it ties into other things that we're talking about today too. Just as far as obsidian is a quintessential black stone. And certainly its associations for me are of the black teot of Tezcatlipoca, and the covering with soot to appear as night, the unknown, the obsidian mirror that you scry into to get this idea of what is unknown, can it be known? Mm-hmm. But it's a very dreamlike quality, and then of course the stone is associated with nightmares and dreams, and people's words reflecting from you because it's a natural mirror. Mm-hmm. So it's interesting to look at this stone more than a lot of others. Sometimes the mystical qualities ascribed to stones are so culturally specific, or we're missing something in translation. It's like, I'm not quite sure how this stone does that, but obsidian is one of those ones that its physical characteristics seem to directly reflect its mystical associations in a way that is much more straightforward than a lot of other stones. Obsidian itself, as far as, like I said, for me, Tezcatlipoca is the teot, the deity in Mexica cosmology that is the unknown. He's the enemy on both sides. It's the night wind. It is it's a supreme god force. It is my personal interpretation of Aztec cosmology is I'm not alone in it, nor did I invent my personal interpretation. I'm just saying my understanding is they're not independent anthropomorphic entities. This is a Western projection upon those that as a polytheistic desire.
I'm talking about the four.
Even the concept that generally I would say that these forces overlap with each other, that one energy can appear as 12 different gods by different names, gods, quote unquote, that are brought into existence through dance, through prayer, through association, through offerings, to allow that spirit to manifest in that way, that all earth deities are the earth deity, that there are many, and one and none. And this overflow or this obsession with like how many gods are there? Well, if tomorrow there needs to be another one because something new comes up in society, another one will be born. And there's nothing wrong with that. The understanding of how to interact with the divine as opposed to how to catalog it.
Right.
And this is, this is just after years of delving into Mesoamerican cosmology, and it's just an obsession with mine. But Tezcatlipoca is an interesting marker for that, because as a deity of the unknown, the enemy on both sides is a very profound title. There is no safety. So if you are, it's like I was with last year at the Psychoanalysis, Art, and the Occult conference. There was a woman there who was with us on the balcony one night. There were like 12 of us talking on the balcony, and she said, "What are your superpowers? What's your superpower?" And we went around the balcony. I don't remember what I said. And we said, "What's yours?" And she said, "Treason." And I was like, that's so profound. That's so Tezcatlipoca in my head, because to betray the betrayer, like how this constant betray, or this constant treason is such an interesting. Now, treason implies breaking down governments, which is its own thing, the established order, and it's its own weighted statement. But as far as what that goes, it ties into the statement of enemy on both sides, that there is no safety. You can't appease the deity that is the enemy on both sides.
Right. You were saying like the notion of this kind of like uber trickster who doesn't even respect his own deals.
Yeah, there's no deals.
Right.
You can have deals with an aspect of him, but then another aspect will come and you're like, I'm not that thing. I'm not the jeweled turkey you just signed the deal with. I'm the jaguar under the mountain. If that's still me, well, yes, but and you're like, and your family's dead, by the way. It is the night and the stillness of night and that which you can only feel but you can't see. That's why the night wind is such an interesting praise name for him. The image made very popular in the Invisibles of the headless skeleton whose ribs flap open and shut. If you can grab the heart, you get the wish. But Tezcatlipoca is just such an interesting thing, because all deities, in some essence, for a Tezcatlipoca-centered person, all deities are him. Because the four children of Omateo, the primary duality, are blue Tezcatlipoca, red Tezcatlipoca, white Tezcatlipoca, black Tezcatlipoca. And it's interesting that he is the one that retains the identity of being a Tezcatlipoca. And Tezcatlipoca itself means smoking mirror, which is the story as to why Obsidian is connected to him. One, because I think the obsession with Obsidian as a Stone Age culture, Obsidian was the primary blade. So they
and a good blade as well.
Absolutely.
The micron thickness that you can get from it is superior to a lot of metals that would come later and require far more quote unquote advanced or civilized metallurgy to produce. Yeah,
a lot more toxins to produce.
You're saying the levels of like surgery that these things enabled.
Yeah, it's pretty profound. Just the level of precision that was done with this. It's like it's just the perceptions on what is valuable. Obsidian is valuable. Jadeite is valuable. But gold was just used for decoration. It wasn't something like, why would we make coins out of that? That doesn't make any sense. That's used to ornament things because it shines in the sun and it's pretty.
But it's soft.
Yeah, exactly. It's not a valuable weapon at all. But it's good for honoring the sun god. But with Tezcatlipoca, the first four emanations out of Omateo are all Tezcatlipocas. They're all mysteries. We don't quite know what they are. We have this idea of even the smoky mirror, the thing you look into to kind of get an idea, holding the obsidian up to the copal smoke so that you can see shapes, things crossing across it, holding it over and then looking at it to read it, which is a technology known to many people in many traditions. But this idea of the mensu thing, that is the mirror where you're holding it over a candle smoke or over smoke itself and then looking at it to see what's stained on it, to see, okay, what am I reading here? And with Tezcatlipoca, we only know from where he's been. We don't know where he's going. It's
dark matter.
Yeah.
We track it by what it's not.
And the story is that when the world was created, and I don't believe it was the current world, because there are 5 in the cosmology. But he comes down and has to fight the earth monster, which is a giant caiman, which is also the world tree. It's the Seba. And he rips off the animal's jaw to tame it. And it becomes land itself and the world tree, but at the same time he loses his foot in the battle, which was bit off. So his foot is replaced with an obsidian mirror. So part of him is eternally mystery. Even when it's depicted, he must remain smoking.
Part of where he stands.
Yes. So the dances for him are also interesting because he's a limping dance, which is gorgeous in danza azteca, where it's just your left foot is bent on, you're walking on your ankle, so it's just consistent. And stomping is me pretending I'm doing the dance even though I'm sitting down. It is some of my favorite dances in danza azteca because of this weird limp thing that starts to happen. And it's the sorcerer god. It's the god of magic, right, and nighttime and mystery and the power of the word, because the word is not given shape. We don't, especially in a culture that I wouldn't say illiterate. I think that's an unfair thing because they had an extremely complex pictograph system.
Right.
And it's a shame that huge amounts of those things were just burned.
And they inherited a bunch of the knot technology as well, right?
Yes.
Yeah, which is still debated as to whether or not that counts as writing.
Writing, who knows?
Just because you invented a form of tapestry / codification first.
Yeah. I know it's like we should just call it writing could be referred to as tapestry as well, and then people might look at it differently. It's kind of like the side effect when people say like there should be a universal language. It's like, great, why not Yoruba? Well, I don't speak Yoruba. It's like, and a lot of people don't speak English.
Mm-hmm.
Like if you really want it, then I'm not promoting Esperanto here in any way.
I was going to say, yeah, that's the one I was thinking. Let's make this fair and have nobody speak it.
Yeah, except that Esperanto is still based in European languages, so it right. makes sense to a European.
Right.
But the blackness is still there with Tezcatlipoca. The priests cover themselves in soot. So again, it's just that's what was bringing to my head there of Mary of Egypt and the blackness and the blackening of the skin from the sun, being exposed to so much light that you become hardened in leather, but the interior is still soft to remain supple of the heart, to exude holiness. In the desert, most of the time you would be reeking of something, and to now exude a smell so sweet because you are so touched by holiness that it's not in death that her body exudes sweetness, but while she is living, she is a living saint,
right?
Which the desert fathers and desert mothers often were felt to be, because they were so retreated from society. The stylites that lived on pillars, and this early culture of desert hermits. Not that many desert mothers, and here you have one, and she's amazing. Tezcatlipoca is amazing.
I was going to ask about the wheel on the top, right? That she's meant to, on top of the pole, there's a wheel. I was thinking about this in terms of looking at depictions of Kairos and how she, amongst other things, with her punk hairdo and her knives, she's also depicted on a flying wheel, but the wheel she's not rolling on it like a wheel of fortune. It's on its side and it spins like a flying saucer.
Mary of Egypt?
No, Kairos. The depiction of
time out of time,
right, of opportunity,
that
you have to grab at her.
Okay. I don't know this depiction, but I like.
Oh, it's great. She has I say it's like a total buzz cut. She's got a long forelock because you're meant to grab opportunity as it's coming. A shaved head at the back because once she's gone, there's no grabbing her. Winged feet, obviously. Knives. Full of knives because opportunity cuts sharp. Oh yeah, it's great. The image of Kairos, if we're going to do Deccan stuff, is related to Vapula in the 72 in the later stuff, which is really interesting in terms of like beaches and winds and coming from the. She comes from the west, so has this connection to Paimon anyway. But yeah, and she's on a.
Everything has a connection. If you could even hear
that. So she's on this wheel, and I was thinking about the wheel turning and spinning you round and seeing things from many perspectives. So she's also like facing in all directions constantly in a dynamic way, as opposed to the practical reason for a wheel at the top of a hermit's pole that they live up. What's the term for it again?
Well, they were stylites.
Stylites, right.
The people who lived on pillars.
So there's a practical reason of just like, that's a thing at the centre that you can build to have a platform to be able to actually sit on. But the idea of it not moving and kind of the reversal of Kairos in some way and an unkairotic thing.
Well, it's interesting because the meditations of heavily based in Thomas, right? Be as passersby, to walk through the world but be not of it. And this is a very strong maxim of, in some form, in that way, of many religious traditions, especially monastic traditions, that to be of the world is to be bogged down by it. And so it doesn't mean you're better than it, because the minute you think that you are, you're back in it.
Right.
But this idea that if you can set up an omphalos, set up the navel of the world, and truly live as if that is it. I remember one nun at the abbey, we were talking about the walls of the abbey and what they are. And she said, there's a wrong belief about what the walls are there for. And many people feel that we're trying to keep the outside world away. And she said, we're trying to protect the world from us when we're not around each other. And she said, we need the extra rules because we are too we recognize it as humans. It's too much.
Right.
It's too much. And that the group, the salvation, there is salvation in the group. There is salvation in the discipline. And I find this wonderful within monastic communities that their vows are to the monastic community first, not the church. So if that order is excommunicated, they're still Benedictine. They're still Augustinian. They're still whatever their order is.
Right.
Which I find fascinating. So it's dedication to the laws or the traditions set up by each monastic order and the individual culture of each abbey or monastery.
And you actually swear to that which you work with and the people you work around and are actually part of, rather than some more abstracted or potentially dogmatic kind of ruling, a worldview rather than a policy or a politic. It also bespeaks the stuff that you find in Afro-diasporic traditions as well, of it's far harder to do the spiritual bypassing of, gosh, I'm so enlightened, look at all this great spiritual stuff I do, when you realize that a lot of these things are prescribed by divination are medicine as much as they are a awarding of a new grade or an advancement towards enlightenment. You need this thing. Or at least life will be a lot better for you if you get it, or if you do it and continue to do it. This practice is to protect you from yourself to some degree, or at least to try.
At least we're going to give you the divination sign that tells you all the shit that we have to tell you that you're not going to listen to unless you get this new Orisha. It's a celebration of that too. I think as far as ATR too is there's I think this is a tangent of course, but welcome to Al and Jesse. I think one of the beautiful things about it is that there is no ignoring of what life actually is, especially in things like Orisha, where there is not this proposed, oh, well, you're going to live this life where no one's ever going to talk shit about you, and you're going to have money flowing in, and you're going to have 1,000 virgins laying their what do females throw at people? Their breasts. Sorry, I feel really gay right now. Throwing themselves at you. So it is not that there's not going to be gossip about you. Gossip is the way of the world. And it's not that you're going to have uninhibited financial success. Orisha often recommends diversifying. It's a merchant-based culture that tried to figure out the best way for you to thrive within the world you live in, not the world that existed 400 years ago, not the world that might exist if the proletariats overthrow the bourgeoisie and everything happens to, didn't say that out loud, that's good. But in order to some people's dreams. And it's about using the resources you have. So this confrontation with, they're not asking you, Orisha aren't asking you to be human, they're asking you to be Orisha. They're asking you to make big decisions and be like, look, do you want heartache? No? Then cut that person out of your life. Oh, but it hurts. So yeah, it's going to hurt more in 10 years if you keep going that way. Oh, you don't want to be in business with that person? Then don't be in business with that person. Make your offer. You ask a question, should I sign this business deal? And the Odú that falls talks about you need to be single partnerships, right? Like no partnerships whatsoever. Only be in partnership with yourself and your ideas. Or sometimes it might say, you'd be like, oh, I'm about to do this thing. What should I do? And the first thing that falls is talking about partnerships and the strengths of that. And like, you need to go find a partnership with a married woman so that, that's in a secure relationship, that her husband won't be jealous, so that you can go, like, it can give you all this advice very specifically. But it isn't about ignoring or saying, I think we do this all a lot in our lives, or at least I'm an idealist and think like, oh, I'll act when the time is right. It's like, no, what is the actual battleground right now? It can't just be like, it's what we talk about with, what I like to think about with Eshu dos Rios a lot. I had this thought about this the other day, but Eshu dos Rios for me is the Eshu of the currents. It's the thing that after you've made this decision, coming out of the bonfire of Moore and his sub-lieutenants, whatever they're...
Deputies?
Deputies, thank you. Western hierarchy. But the idea that you've taken the torch to the fire and you're walking across the street or the river now.
Right.
You can't just take it because the cars are going to hit you.
Right.
You've got to look both ways. You've got to pay attention to what's coming. And I had this flash the other day that it made me think that riots and suicide bombers and all these things are actually Dos Rios impulses of you can't just impose top-down hierarchy of or government or heavy anything of dictum without looking at these things. And sometimes you have to know, okay, in order to cross this stream, we're probably going to lose a couple things, but let's keep in touch with the more precious things. Let's make sure they're interior of the boat or whatever it is, or it's a really weird metaphor now. But the idea being that sometimes you have to pick your battles. Sometimes you have to know that you are going to lose some things. So figure out how to secure the things that are the most important. That if you try and do something unanimously or kind of megalithically the way that a lot of people do, there will be repercussions. And the things that poke against that you didn't take the temperature of the room, the things that poke against that because you didn't do your research at all before you put this out before your audiences, that's the Dos Rios impulse there. It's the river is now flooding because it's going to find a way that you've got to figure out a way to work with things.
Right. How to cross. So less about how to navigate a boat on a river and more about crossing a river as well. Like how to move forward in the face of moving against the grain of the world.
Yeah.
Or part of it. I think about the river, if we're talking Dos Rios, as one of the deputies or sub-lieutenants of Eshure, Sete Cachoeiras. And the parallels there is matched to Neberos, who has these two lines as well, one of which is a lot like the other kinds of work. So one guild is a really good example of why I think looking at guilds, looking at which deputies rule the three sets. Yes.
Which are the witch ones?
Oh, the witch ones are those under Astaroth. Definitely. Sagatana and Neberos. The first ones of Neberos. I think I like looking at these groups of three subordinates to see where their powers inform each other, because for Neberos, it's one of the best examples because you've got three things that don't seem necessarily terribly connected. You've got the powers of invisibility from one, from Morel. You've got the power to make feasts or banquets with Fritimir, and you've got the power of sleeping and exploring dream by extension, but mainly sleep through Hook de Garras. So combining those starts to make a lot more sense, especially when you understand or start to engage with invisibility mysteries in a way that's useful.
Sleep and dream come after feasting and banquets, because that's a natural progression. That would make perfect sense.
Oh, it's a prime spirit working guild, right? How do you see the spirits? By being invisible as well. What do? You make offerings, and how do you interact with them or receive positive word or be receptive? Sleep and dream.
And this idea of invisibility as something more than just being invisible the way that we think of it now. We're not talking Lon Chaney here, but the idea of, again, being in the world but not of it comes into effect here of, in my understanding and experience, that it's about not being visible, so not so much as the opposite of visible.
Right.
Don't impose the dualism there of retreat from the things of the world. So there's a reason for, in so many spirit systems, of retreating from sex, salt, meat, drinking, heavy things that kind of bring you back into the pleasures of the world and kind of tie you to something other than the focus.
Right.
A kind of Mary of Egypt impulse of like, how do I regain my focus here? That in order to do the Solomonic conjurings of, there is a mini Lent that you do before doing these things.
Yep, it's a full Lent sometimes. 40 days. Yeah.
So this is ignored. This is ignored by many people, and I think mostly because we shy away from I don't want to have to do all that restriction, because restriction is the word of sin.
Right. Right. I'm not interested in feeling guilty.
And then why didn't these things show up for me? I don't know.
Right. Purification as not having to admit that you worship some kind of misophobic deity who won't possibly speak to you unless you're squeaky clean, or some sense of moral superiority through your own abnegations or restrictions. Exactly. moving away from that notion and towards an idea of like, are your work tools sharp? Are they clean? Do you have a work surface that isn't full of stuff? Like, do you have the space and time to devote to this thing
the
and do
traditional
it?
craft metaphor of clearing your field. That you've got to get rid of the rocks and get the field ready for planting the blood acre.
Right.
And it brings up some interesting point. You reminded me as you were talking about kambo, which is the frog poison that is used in Brazil. And for those that don't know it, there is a frog that is collected, it is harvested, the venom from it, it is re-released, and it's too valuable to kill, that's why. And it's collected, and it is administered through the arms and the legs, depending on your gender. For men, it is in the arm, which is the source of strength for men. For women, it is in through the thigh. And there are a certain number of points that are given, and they burn the outer layer of skin off, and then they use a diluted form of the poison on your skin. Now, it is said that the paler the skin, the more intense an experience it is for you. This has kind of been my experience in seeing it go through many people. You are being killed by the frog while it's on your skin, even though it's a diluted form. It is poison overtaking your body. You will get hot, you'll start getting sweaty, you'll get nauseated, even in a small dose. It will burn up and flare the skin out, and then that is washed away and then it subsides. So you have about 2 minutes of that at your peak. If you pass out or vomit, then the person wipes it off you. It's not going to kill you unless it's not enough. If they burn through much to your skin, if they really go through the muscle, that's a bad thing. But you're only burning the outer layer of the skin. Anyway, the idea behind this in its traditional context is that hunters took it before going into the jungle because it was considered that it greened you. You were not considered human while the venom was inside your system. So animals did not look at you the same way. Venomous animals that stalked you would no longer stalk you. Your prey would not see you coming because now you were a frog. And it increases the sensitivity or the sensory input through your normal senses, sight, smell, and hearing for sure. It also has the immune boosting effects.
Right, it resets.
Yeah, so your body becomes so overloaded that oftentimes those of us that suffer from extreme allergies when taking kambo, not legal in this country, legal there, able to kind of give you an immune boost for 6 months, and you have less allergy problems. You might not get colds or flus during that 6 months. So there are a lot of people that do this. There have been controversial tests on people with HIV or Hep or things like that, where a series of the solution given at regular intervals can help the viral load go down, increase white cells and things like that. So, or T cells, can increase T cells. I'm just going to say that so it doesn't sound like an idiot when I say it. That said, where I was going with that was the idea of being invisible.
Yeah.
That the idea of walking into the forest wearing the skin of something else, or the venom or the blood of something else.
Right.
So there is this thing where it brings you closer to death, and by that, not a trial, it's literally the keyhole that you have to pass through. So you've got to figure out as a human how to go through something only a frog can go through.
Right.
And the way that this is done is through taking kambo into the skin and almost dying because you feel a hint of its poison. And in a similar way that fasting for 40 days, we're not talking no food whatsoever, but there's a progressive lessening of meat and exposure to complex foods.
Right.
No alcohol to the point where you're just bread and water, and then a few days of no food. But this complete lack of something means that we all blame nightmares on bad indigestion from a big meal. How do you know that the demon you're seeing isn't just roast beef? Well, if you haven't eaten any in a long time, and that's an oversimplification, but the idea being that this restriction is a voluntary thing. It's not like you're saying it's a law that you have to go through forever.
Right.
The idea that Lent is inherently negative is an odd thing that a lot of people have put onto Catholics, that the papists do this weird thing called Lent and give stuff up. It can also be about adding things on that are an added effort of like, I'm going to check in on my neighbor every day, or whatever it is. Does not have to be, I'm giving up hot dogs. Well, oh yeah, wonderful. Jesus loves you more.
He was tempted with hot dogs in the desert.
We're all tempted with wieners in the desert. Yeah, but invisibility. Going back to Mr. Bale.
Yes, of course. And if invisibility is of the wind in the darkness, then we're also into the second line, which is in its Nola nod. I love calling it that. Neverus' second line, who are the two sub-deputies, as they sometimes get called, of Khil and Sogolath. who are the left and right hands of, well, their counterparts are
to the hands of death.
right. Speaking of comparisons between the good people of the book, the bad people of the book, and the good people of Kimbanda.
Wow. Yeah.
Then we can also start talking about our demon of the week. And this episode is hopefully brought to us by Khil and Sete Cachoeira. Cachoeira. My Portuguese
like
is terrible.
cash, but less British. Cachoeira. You know, it's interesting because Sete Cachoeiras is, as a spirit, is not one you hear about as much. To my knowledge, certainly in the south. And this might be because there are less waterfalls.
Imagine that.
Except in the areas I go to. But my experience is that they're still around. It's just big urban Kimbanda does not necessarily have giant cachoeiras everywhere. And certainly we're not talking about one cachoeira. We're talking about 7. Not literally, but maybe. Sure, if you ever find a spot where there's 7 waterfalls flowing into one, like, you know, give me that water. Just tell me how much you're going to charge.
There might be worth putting a word in about that. The notion of sevens.
That's where I was
in
going.
Kimbanda.
Yeah.
So most obviously, we can think about it in terms of the 7 kingdoms. The idea that the difference between Pombagira, Sete Cachoeiras, and Pombagira and Cruciadas, that one of them is present in. So they have the notion of each kingdom in every kingdom as well.
Completion.
Right. So a sense of perfection is the other idea. The totality by representing all of your options.
Yeah, and this certainly seems to be kind of a European agreement with Congolese cosmology as well. That interestingly, it kind of ties into our talk about Geomantic and Oudh today. Also, the notion of 7 itself is the 7 shells is Odí for us. So in Dilogun, which is Carcer, which is as far as Odú wise, it's the world. It's the vagitus that burns and destroys. So it is the grave. It is the womb. It is the tomb. It is all these things. Tomb and grave are kind of the same thing, Jesse. They're not, but they, in this context of shorthanding things, they should have been. I think also just because of the European notion of 7 being the biblical days of the week and the 7 classical planets, like there's a lot of weight to 7 that is, once you're exposed to the ideologies of 7 planets and you know this kind of grand unification of Western magical theory that kind of finds its way in, especially filtered in through Umbanda and the Theosophists.
Small h heptarchic.
It becomes very difficult to unlearn and unsee this. Oh, the 7s are everywhere. It becomes very. It's the thing with any meta paradigm, right? When you're trying to make it, you will then fit everything into your meta paradigm. It's like if you're going to fit everything under the Kabbalistic tree of life, you will not be convinced that there is something that can't fit on there.
Yep.
And even if someone from another system, that doesn't make any sense. You're like, no, it does. You just don't know enough yet.
Right. Or you develop a process model whereby, well, it's really about how you can fit it onto the tree. That's the lesson you learn. The answer isn't important. It's the journey. The treasure was inside you all along.
I like my rabbi friend that's basically constantly saying, like, no, mix up the order of everything all the time. Tomorrow, just put Keter at the bottom and see what happens. Then you're just going to start learning. But the idea of 7 being, it's a profound number numerologically within Congolese worldview as well. And the multiple of 7 at key events of what 7 minutes means, 7 days, 7 hours, these things have significant times. And that the onset of the age of reason starts around 7, and that 14 is when adulthood starts in a traditional society, and at 21 you should have had children already, and it keeps on going from there, and that you're going to start seeing possibility of grandchildren by 28 and further on from there. So it's an interesting parallel in that way, but I think it's at this point it means so many things to have 7 as opposed to just 1 within Kimbanda especially. Sete Cachoeiras is he's a caboclo Kimbandero, so he is caboclos are the indigenous spirits. Originally, caboclo was a term on the racial scale that describes someone who was half European and half indigenous. Over time, it seemed to be transferred to indigenous in general, and I don't know why this shift happened. It is a term used to refer to the indigenous. I don't know if that's part of it was quote unquote half-breeds that were the bridge between the cultures in that way to a larger audience. I don't know if the term became very prominent within Umbanda because of the fact that Umbanda was considered, and especially in its beginning, kind of a whitewashing of the other systems. And there's a lot of questions that a lot of people have raised over the years. But you say caboclo to an average Brazilian, and it doesn't matter the history, but they know you're talking about an indigenous spirit, or at least the depiction of an indigenous spirit. But the caboclos quimbanderos are a certain group of spirits within Quimbanda that are those caboclos that work within the laws of Quimbanda, that acknowledge that these spirits exist. Are they the exact same as the caboclos with a matching name? It's up for debate. Are they just different masculine, say one? Because there is caboclo Sete Cachoeiras. Looks very different from the statues of Eshu Sete Cachoeiras.
And we're also into the realm of how much are these spirits an individual dead person who coheres things around them, and how much are they a thing that has cohered dead people around them.
Yes, and the idea that much like the beliefs about many things is that these are nicknames, and that the specific names are the province of those people who work with them intimately. And it may be that everybody is working with a different one. It may not be. You're talking a grand metaphysic that is most people will have theories on. But if you spend too much time arguing it, you have a different priority. You're selling something most likely. Sete Cachoeiras is said to be the Eshu that helped Moses part the Red Sea, or the Reed Sea, depending on who you want to argue with. He is generally pretty serious and demands forthrightness and honesty, which makes sense. You're playing near a waterfall. You don't want someone who's going to mess around and make you fall over it. He is heavily deals with passions in general. So this makes sense that the river that is flowing all the time all of a sudden overtumbles. And so it can be an Eshu that can use to calm down extreme emotions as well as to provoke them. He can be gorgeous and I think Nick uses the word intoxicating to describe him. I only have a few experiences with him and only once seeing him down. Interestingly, I've also heard in some houses he wets the hair of the mount when he comes down, like they pour water on. Similar to other spirits that are like that. Cold water in Quimbanda is weird. This was in Umbanda house where I saw him come down. But it's generally said that you need to have a relationship with him before you just call on him. You have to know the waterfall before you pretend you're going to take other people over it. Don't go over it in a barrel without checking first, I guess. There's not really much more to say on it. He's a little bit chaotic. He's a little bit hard to predict. He is a trickster. It's an Eshu after all. He is not uncommonly talking about what we say with Tezcatlipoca. He is also known for going against his word. So you can give him an offering that he accepts, and then he'll say, okay, great. And then he'll completely turn your life upside down because, well, he's a waterfall. And he's 7 of them at this. His ponto is definitely, the ponto riscado is, I said it like a Spaniard because that's my reference point. Ponto riscado is, it literally is a trident falling over, which looks like an impotent trident for some, but it's the trident becoming the waterfall. Right. And then 7 crosses around it. So 7 crossroads, the X symbol. So you have 7 again being, it's tied into the encrucijadas there because you have the water is now changing directions. It's a crossroads of direction. It's a crossroad of air and water and land and water and all these things are happening.
It's a free fall as well. It's not just that you've been swept away by the current of something. It's that suddenly there is nothing beneath you and you are plummeting.
Yeah. He does take really, really rounded stones like you would find under a waterfall. And so the caboclo and the Eshu both are propitiated in houses that work with more than just Eshus or caboclos that are incorporating Orisha, like Umbanda houses, because the river stones are so important. So it is a way of propitiating him that you might be able to find good ones, to find good river stones in this way.
Does that mean a relationship with Sete Cachoeiras?
Yes, but Sete Cachoeiras is more at the beach. So there's the ocean tumbling there. But this is almost considered a more natural because it's a consistent process, whereas waterfalls are rarer. Right. Well, certainly rarer than the singular thing that is the ocean. Right. And so encompassing. But the thing with the waterfalls is like even as Ponto, right? Tremeteja is the shake the earth.
And there's
because
where I think we get the counterparting.
Yeah, so shake the earth because Mr. Seven Waterfalls has come, shake everybody. So it's not just Tremeteja, now it's Trememundo. So it's shake the world, shake everybody, because so the first one, let me explain this. Tremeteja is shake, because Mr. Seven Waterfalls has arrived. Trememundo is about shake everybody, and then it just says fall Laroye, which is just it's almost like a weird Kimbanda version of life is but a dream. Just like Kaya is such an interesting thing of like fall Laroye.
row your boat fiery over the edge.
Yeah. So I don't know. It's an interesting ponto. And I think that's the only one Nick gives in the book.
He isn't. What's the phrase that's used for, say, like Sete Cachoeiras, mounts from the earth, pulls from the earth?
The only time I've seen him came down, he mounted more like a caboclo, which is just there's a certain pattern of how they come.
Okay. So we're definitely not talking about a literal fall to the ground when he turns up.
Not the same way, but Eshus generally, all Eshus do tend to slam against the ground in some form.
Right, but it's often more of a kind of like
yeah, there's going to be contact with the earth in some way. Those are great illustrations
for radio. Yeah, that was perfect.
Just like our faces. So I think with him, because it's not one that it's not come out a lot up in readings. I know people that have him, and like I said, I've seen him come down in Umbanda temple. I've seen like a caboclo come down too. They're not dissimilar, but caboclos all look very similar to me when they come down. They're shaking arrows and hunting.
Kind of a Shosi-esque.
Oh, Shosi-esque, yeah, because he's the leader, right, of that group. I have my favorite caboclos, right? Pena Branca it's my boy, and a few others. And Caboclo Jurema is she's gorgeous. And anyway, caboclos are fantastic, and it is truthfully, if you look into Umbanda's history, it is the cult of the caboclos. That's what started it, and it kind of branched out from there to incorporate everything.
Right. And
it took the message behind it being that the indigenous spirits of Brazil were now coming in, merging with the laws of Kardecian Spiritism,
right,
and saying, let's incorporate everything. So as far as like Umbanda's creation epic, it's a lovely story. It's a lovely way of ecumenicalizing everything.
Right.
Unfortunately, what happens when that happens is that you can also be like the system where you don't quite, you're just passing on a little bit of information, which can lead people to explore those things in more full. But there are cults that are more dedicated to just working with caboclos now. I don't know the specific histories of those. My experience is more with different lines of Umbanda and Kimbanda de Rice houses and then Candomblé. And Brazil is only now being looked at by the West as much for these things, but there have been some amazing scholastic works in the past 60 years that have looked at what things are and the trade between Africa and Brazil that kind of revitalized Candomblé and just Umbanda's kind of revitalization in the 70s and what that went. It kind of went very Afro-focused and got away a lot from a lot of the caboclo stuff, which was kind of unsubstantiated, but then towards the 2000s, again, there seems to be this rise again of caboclo things and kind of a resurgence of incorporating actual Tupi and Tupinamba things into this and incorporating indigenous things from more Amazonas up north into the northern houses. And I think this is a lot just people are finding that each their own expression within Umbanda because it is such a meta paradigm.
Right, it attempts to be very universal.
Yeah, it's not unlike what voodoo is in Haiti, where voodoo is meant to be the umbrella under which all spirits can work.
We're well aware of those spirits over there.
Yeah,
and we don't work with them, and we don't especially want to, but we could.
Yes, and and just because I don't work with them doesn't mean I shouldn't listen to them when they show up and they say, we have a child coming to you, so take care of them and they will learn, which is really beautiful when the person can do that from a genuine place that is not about ego or money,
right,
and can really explore what that spirit is doing. And it just gets dangerous when it becomes other motives mixed with it.
Right.
Find Mary. Find your focus. Yeah. tan that hide. That was... Anyway.
Find your pole.
Find your pole. Tan that hide.
Sit and swivel.
Oh, jeez. Sorry, Mary. Al's British. She doesn't understand these things.
I know not what I do. So the connection there is interesting, and when between the Verum spirit Khil and the counterparted Sete Cachoeiras, for sometimes it's really I don't want to say obvious, but the connection is very much, oh yeah, you are both kind of expressly concerned with such and such a thing. Mm-hmm. More often there's a kind of, it feels like there's a sideways glance at so this spirit is concerned with this thing, and from again this perspective of when Tiresias are trying to literally whitewash, well, literally I suppose, but Europeanize.
Just steamroller with white paint.
Yeah. Palimpsest it all. Sometimes they're a kind of angle, and I feel like this is one of the ones that comes in at kind of an angle, and I wonder if the Ponto comes first before the association, or the Ponto is born out of knowing that the association is with Khil primarily as being about earthquakes, as causing the earth to shake. Now, in many versions of the Verum, that's it. It just makes great earthquakes. Just a 3-word entry that you have to then, pull stuff out from. In some of the other forms, some of the earlier manuscripts, the De Secretis one especially, which seems to be one of the earliest Verum-esque forebearers, there's talk of stricken fields, and there's also talk of homes as well, which sometimes gets pulled in to trying to get a wider picture on who or what this spirit is, what their office is. And this idea of being concerned with towns or homes, as well as agriculture, as well as shaking the earth, is really interesting to me. And the way I've ended up approaching and working with Khil, because, again, to take it from a guild perspective, the other two members of that guild under Satanakia are Frimost and Klepoth, who both have wands in the setup for Verum. Like they're really important, at least for the conjuration process. And so the other is Khil. So my interest was in finding out if there was a tool that could be made a home for Khil, or made a tool, which is one of my favorite things about Verum anyway, is the idea of the spirit seals on the tools. And the spirit seal on the tool not necessarily being the spirit seal that you use otherwise, that spirits like Klepoth have several seals, and some of which are clearly more about one kind of utility than another. So I was interested in working that, and in working what's a practicality of earthquakes. How does one turn the grandiosity of a historical grimoire text from a different time into something practical and workable in one's life and in one's work, without psychologizing it, without simply making it, oh well, that's, we're not really talking about so and so. It's a metaphor for something safe that doesn't actually challenge anything. And the thing I found with earthquakes, and again, this is an odd one in terms of putting your own kind of practice out there, is Khil has a lot of utility in harvesting dirt for magics. For me, that's one of the things that they've come through to do, and this notion of stirring the earth and of stirring the virtues of it makes an awful lot of sense to me.
Sete Cachoeiras has a reputation for, if you need to go deeper, he'll take you deeper. And I mean, the thing that's just for the obvious side of it, of a waterfall does make the earth shake, and the sound is deafening if it's a large waterfall. You go through there and your body is vibrating as you get closer to it. So it's the thing of the if you live near it, you're always vibrating, and after a certain point, the deafening nature of it comes, and it's all you hear. And it is a different type of spirit that can live under a waterfall, or is the waterfall. And I think there's also the thing that, since we're talking about like emotions and things like that on a practical level, the learning in oneself, this is borderline psychology, learning in oneself the warning signs for when you are about to go over the edge. What are the warning signs? When do you start to shake and tremble, and how can you stop that before it becomes you're thrown over the edge of the waterfall?
Right.
So,
and here we're into that pharmaca thing again, that the spirit that rules the the making of earthquakes can also be appealed to stop an earthquake.
Yes.
Right. So when do we not want the world to shake? And so this idea of being interested in the affairs of towns and homes is, I think, where we're at with that. How do we build anti-fragile things? To quote Talib, what's his face? The notion of building something that, rather than requiring order, that things stay the same for it to stay strong, actually becomes stronger through increased chaotic interactions or novelty, that it actually strengthens it, not just strengthens it, but increases its anti-fragility. So that makes a great deal of sense to me. And thinking about how earthquakes are avoided in terms of in Japan and on the west coast, of the idea of like ball bearings. So just that fundamental thing of surviving monstrously strong onslaughts by being flexible.
Yes.
And being like water.
It's interesting too, that because of the ancient beliefs about earthquakes and the connection to water. Right? Poseidon is god of earthquakes and the ocean.
Right.
It's because there's water that flows everywhere, and therefore it is raising the land. That's interesting too. Certainly in that way. And not that there's a lot of geysers in Brazil that I know of, but this idea of the water that shoots out of the earth is also interesting to me. I have one friend in Iceland who has an obsession with the spirit of the geysers in general. And he's from there 20 generations or whatever it is, but
they are pretty weird.
Just the idea that clockwork that it builds up in this way, and that, first off, the first time I visited, my Icelandic pronunciation is terrible, but geyser, which is the geyser that they're all named for, was pretty impressive. And similarly, just Old Faithful is impressive. Just this idea that the earth is going to exude in this way. It brings up complete metaphors every time of just like, what is going on here? And that it could kill you. Some of them are extremely toxic to be around. Some of them are just shooting up boiling water, which is itself, not a fun thing to be around. But again, the earth shakes and it expels something. And similarly, the river is reaching the edge of the land. And the idea that the edge of the map, originally the waters fell off, and this is where they go. And that's an interesting thing there too, if we take it in the kind of different cosmologies of what exactly is a waterfall. The ocean's falling off the disk of the world at some point and feeding the waters of space is an interesting side of it too. That if there's 7 rivers or 7 oceans, then they're all flowing off too, and there are contexts by which Sete Cachoeiras or Khil is responsible for this, the edge of the world that shakes there, that it is the disk that's vibrating. And if he becomes, is it him shutting off those waterfalls that allows a tidal wave to come back and shake ourselves? There's a connection there that you can play with in the mind.
If you fall off the earth, if we take that model of the spirit world as like the upside down, very traditional idea, then that water's geysering up. Yeah, it's flow. It's
springs.
It springs in the underworld. Yeah, I like that notion of the edges of the earth. That's very much in line with a less literal take on the geomantic figure of Carcer. If we want to move on to that.
Segue, my friend.
It feels like a good segue, right? I mean, obviously the notion of the prison cell feels like a very obvious, there are walls in the way and you can't move. But the idea of, you can go over that thing, but you're never coming back. The boundaries of the possible but not healthy, or of the unreturnable.
Even if we look at the figure itself, is easily comparable to a vagitus, to a vesica Pisces. And the breaking of the hymen is a common metaphor here. Like once broken, it's broken. It is a change of state. Whatever moral descriptions you want to put onto that, that's individual character or religious or cultural, whatever that is, cultural imposition. But it is a change of state. And in the same way that birth is a change of state, in the same way that death is a change of state.
Right.
And there is something haunting about those that are born dead in this, in this type of thing, or those that die and come back.
Right.
It goes against the natural order. You've already changed state too many times.
Right, and that feels like a very Saturnine feature of not just constriction or restriction, which seem to be coming up a lot as well, but almost that things should be irrevocable, that when they're permanent, that there's something that has to shift for the cosmos to allow that.
And that's funny. You're just reminding me of the primary story of Odí, which is the corresponding Odú The primary refrain is where the grave was first dug, and the story of the adulterous woman. She was in a town where they didn't bury their dead; they put them at the bases of trees and covered them. And she wanted to run off with another man, and decided that she would fake her own death, and was buried interred at the base of a tree. That's not internment at that point. She was laid at the base of a tree. And woke up, the next day, and pulled her own kind of successful Romeo and Juliet, or just Juliet, I guess, and went off to another village. And at a certain point, was found out years later after living a happy life, and was dragged back and killed and buried. The grave was dug for the first time. Like, that which is dead should stay dead. You were dead, and there's the belief that it's because she lied, and there's the other thing where like no, she claimed death. Like, death is now after her. Like, you can't there's that side of it too. So there's the justice side of don't cheat death because it'll come after us. There's the other side of it of deception. There's all these things of like, but the point is that the idea of the grave was first dug to make it permanent, to make sure that what is dead stays dead.
That notion of death stalking us wherever we go as well. The idea of that which circles us is interesting, and circles us in terms of every direction, that the man running away from his prediction to die in the marketplace of whatever town it is goes to the other town where death is waiting. Always where we turn to, there is the circle.
Death feels a little bit like the Agent Smith of the Matrix. It's just death will wear whatever face it needs to. We cloak our deaths. I say this with Santísima Muerte all the time. We can cloak our deaths or dress our deaths in whatever colors we want. It's still death. And that is the important thing. That which will kill us is very different from a universal concept of death. And for working with her, for working with anything that is death-related itself, it is an important thing to consider, to truly consider engaging the thing that will kill you, that will take your life, as opposed to just a concept.
Right.
Abstract.
Right. I think that's the case with part of the power of an ancestral practice, or working with your ancestors, or venerating them, is meditating on your own mortality. And the idea of Carcer as mortality itself, as like this is the perambulation of how far you can go from this central locus out and around it, but that's all the time. This is the restriction, but it's also
the point within the circle.
Right. But it's also the allotted chance you have. This is your domain, your life kingdom stuff that you can cross across it. So then you have the nice Malkuth X-Man symbol.
Crossbones.
Right. Golgotha shout outs.
Oh my God.
But the idea of meditating on your death, not simply as a morbid attempt to creep other people out by how dark and spoopy you are, but as
dark and spoopy out.
You are super dark and spoopy. And the more you tell people that, the more it's definitely believable.
What do you do with it after you've had that revelation, and after you wear that label is the interesting thing too. Is it should enhance your life.
Right.
Not just that we conform into a nihilistic desire of like descent into the earth and lay there languishing for days while we expect our mom to make us food.
To make us food.
Yeah. You're such a oh my goodness. Mommy making macaroni, or is it the earth? Oh, I'm so brilliant. Thank you for recognizing that out.
It's against the blank page syndrome of immortality, right? If we're going to frame it like that, given no rules, told to tell a joke. Write a story, do a thing. Here's blank paper. Do anything you want. It's a lot trickier for most of us to start doing something than it is if we're given a brief of some kind. If we're given rules within which we can play a game.
Oh, you mean restrictions can be for friends? What?
Right. So Carcer as the cell, right? The fundamental building block of life. Carcer as the magic circle.
The thing that you can retreat to maintain your center. That is the pole hole. That keeps the pole erect. It is the thing that allows the flagpole to stand.
Right.
And
which is fascinating. Sorry to interrupt. Which is fascinating in terms of comparing it to the other hand of Saturn of Tristisia, which is the pit. Or usually the ideograph is depicted as the pit. I like it as the depression as well.
I like it as the upside down rainbow. Yeah, it's interesting. because I also think it's helpful to know, like, on the practical side, like, Carcer is, I've seen it played out. Let's not forget that it's all containers, literally bags, cul-de-sacs, dead-end streets. Could also be firmness in a decision. Is this somebody I should stay with? Like, well, Carcer with other geomantic signs could be a yes. This is the last like you're gonna be with this person forever,
yeah.
Or it could be it's gonna feel like a prison. So we got to figure out what that open end is, and which is why geomancy is, unless you really look at all of the signs there, it's very easy to put your interpretation of this so strongly, as it can be with any divination.
Right.
But geomancy, because it has these 16 symbols, and that's it, because geomancy doesn't pair off similar to, I'm not just touting like, oh, Odú's better. Odú's still complicated, it takes a lot of time. But the idea of Carcer paired with Justicia is very different from Carcer paired with Fortuna Major. Mm-hmm. There's just going to be a difference.
Especially when we get into shoulds, into fate business. I think, we started with Via and the idea of, moon signs are all variable. But generally you get a strong sense, particularly if you're working with the spirits of these figures as well, that you're getting a strong sense of like which interpretation makes more sense with the question that's asked, with the context, with what are my first impressions, what am I comparing this to, and the idea of the straight and narrow that can be absolutely it's your way, it's your way, it's the way, it's a way, it's a way, versus this is the only way, and the idea of what's in a determinism against free will-ish tension. What is prison? What is a prison sentence? What is being in the world? What is making decisions? What's the roadblocker? What's restricting what we don't need? What's taking away distractions? What's getting us back to our anchorage? Anchorage?
I mean, sure, but I thought you guys didn't like anchorites and things like that.
Right, you guys?
The Brits.
Yeah.
Isn't that the whole like Black Annis thing where she was just an anchorite that,
right?
Meaning nun that was.
They're super untrustworthy.
Rogue nun who lived
Most
in a cave
of them
and turned into a demon.
Yeah,
and then built a housing complex over the cave. There's nothing sacred to you people. Want to visit that housing complex. But with Odí, it's an Odú of the world. It is a very common Odú to fall. It is the problems of the world are found here. It is an Odú of gossip, of intrigue, of birth, of death, of fucking, of many things.
The whole telenovela of it all.
Yeah, and there's a I like it said like that, telenovela.
I don't know if that's accurate though, because that feels like the melodrama rather than the quotidian minor constants. I
mean, on one level, yes, it exemplifies kind of the drama of everything, but that is life too. Like if we approach it, take it one step back from that and just look at it, that there is, again, with the practicality of Orisha religion, that it is going to point out the stuff we're trying to ignore that we pretend doesn't exist.
Right.
So the drama of everyday life, of going to work, of you're late for work every day. What does that mean? Like, this, your boss is going to talk shit about you because you're wearing a certain color because of, who knows? But this is the average things of everyday life, and deals with everything from indecision to pride to betrayal to lust is all there. Odí has everything. I think it is in Odí. There's because of the looking of, it looks like the Vagitus, the symbol, the geomantic symbol, and the Odú symbol. The song that is, I think it's sung in Gelede stuff as well, but where does the rich man come from the cunt? Where does the poor man come from the cunt? It's referred to as the cunt song by anthropologists. This is how they translated it. But it's just this homage to how important the vagina is, and that Odí is the earth Odú. It is, as much as it is connected to Yemoja, who is for us in the New World an oceanic deity, but water in general, because she is the Ogun River in Nigeria. And people go back and forth on whether she's river or ocean. It doesn't matter for the fact that her essential qualities don't change, of nurture, of she is the breast that nurtures and the hips that birth. She is the mother who never rejects. In Cuba, we say that we give all heads to Obatala because he created all heads and therefore can take them. In Brazil, they give all heads to Iemanjá when they don't know. And they used to give all foreigners to Iemanjá because there was no way they could have Orisha because they weren't ancestrally connected to Africa.
Okay.
So
and they presumably came across waters as well.
And, well, everybody does because the dead are on the other side.
Yemaya must have allowed them to get here.
Yeah. So there's the thing of her heart is so big she would never reject anyone. So I remember hearing a story from one Mãe de Santo who she is African descendente, which is just she has black ancestry, but she on Brazilian terms she's not black by any means. Brazil is very based on skin color for these classifications, not just ancestry. And when they told her that her head was marked for Iemanjá, she was like, "But I do have Orisha. I do," because she felt like being marked for Iemanjá was the catch-all for people that didn't really have Orisha or had no business being in the religion. So it's kind of like the same lackluster thing happens to a lot of people with, "Oh, your head is marked for Obatala." People are like, "Really? He's so boring." You know? It's like Obatala created the world. Obatala is the Orisha of dreams. Obatala is the Orisha of creative insight.
Inspiration.
There's a lot of amazing things about him. And he needs help getting things going. He needs a lot of coffee and a lot of people to help him keep going on the fireside. But it's not a consolation prize. No Orisha ever is.
Right.
And this idea of medicine is its own thing. There is, for me, associated with Odí very heavily, there is a primary Osogbo, or Ibi if you're using the Nigerian term, but a primary ill aspect or primary ill luck.
Bad pattern.
Because Osogbo are like the anti-gods.
Right.
Is how they become to be referred to. And
disease,
paralysis, loss, this type of thing. Araye.
Also, not just like natural, as in like not human. Like gossip is can be. Oh yeah, I got that right. Yeah.
Yeah, but that's tied to Araye, which is so Araye is problems of the world, and Araye is a very hard Osobo to describe for all of us. But there are several interpretations of it. One of them is I believe is one that Bimbola described it as the body possessed by witches. Now that got me going on it because Ara is body or people. Aye is the world, but Aje can be witch. And let's be clear, this is not self-selected witches. These are the amoral forces that preternaturally existed that came down, and one can form alliances with them, but they owe no alliance to you.
Right.
These are the West African idea of witchcraft is not on par with modern ideas in the West of witchcraft, and to confuse the two does a disservice both directions.
It does seem more useful to at least think about them coming from a very Western background as more like bird demons to an extent. They're not just human, and they're not originally human.
Yeah, there's a couple different layers here, because someone who is considered a witch could just have so much natural power flowing through them that they're feared because they have Ajay power.
Right.
But the Ajay also exists independently of humans, and a human who has formed an alliance with them has also, it's like forming an alliance with Orisha. There's this something going on there.
It's Ajay that it doesn't originate with you.
Yes, and so this idea that it could very well be that you go into the woods and come back out a witch, that's verified. But this would be done by power and prestige, and then people would be very scared of you. In certain areas, they'd hunt you down. But that aside, the witches, on a very simple level here, we're talking about the metaphor of you plant your seeds in the field, in the black earth, wanting to grow your hopes and dreams, and the birds come and pick at them. And the birds are the things you didn't foresee coming. So we can build scarecrows, we can build things, but those pesky birds, and it's anything that distracts you or your things from growing. So in some way, this Araye, a body possessed by witches, Araye is being henpecked. Araye is Facebook. Araye is what happens on Facebook all the time. One person gets called out on something, all of a sudden, and everybody starts pecking on that little thing to get recognition or to be part of the in crowd or whatever it is. The gossip mill. It is the way the world works. You can't fight against it, really. If you go in there and try and save your reputation, help out a friend, you better come in with a lot of people, because it's just going to turn around on you very quickly, no matter what you do. It's almost impossible to change the tide once you got to wait for it to be done. But it is that henpecking. So a body possessed by things that are not important, or at least not important for this thing. Because I don't want to say the Ajay have their own agenda and their own thing going on, but a body possessed by distraction.
That distraction is fascinating to me. Like that, the stealing of attention.
Yeah.
That's
I'm distracting you from your goals. You could be doing something profound, and now you are just attacking someone.
Theft is the main motif that binds the bird spirits of the European grimoires. Mm-hmm. It's often stealing
the magpie.
Yeah, stealing the king's riches can bring things from someone else's house, or will take things or move. Well,
because wealth is finite, and therefore.
Right. Oh yeah. So it's got to come from somewhere. Yeah. So they're already aware that they're not like conjuring gold, but this notion of stealing, like what to apply an allegorical layer to open it out rather than explain it away. What is the king's riches? What is the wealth of resource of our time, our limited encircled time on the earth? What are our resources? What are our riches? What do we have to bring to bear? Our time and our attention.
The limits of the bag of wealth.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which then opens as the bag of Acquisitia, or the two bowls.
It's small.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And just to be clear, I'm not saying that Odí is intrinsically always Araye, but I think that this Oudh that provides all of this saltiness, salt water of creation, and just mierda and chismosos and all these other things, shit and shit talkers. Let me translate that. I was just talking about someone with this the other day that chismoso is not the same thing in like, you can translate it as shit talker, but shit talking in English doesn't have the same connotation. Because now you can say, when you're a shit talker, the person will be like, yes, I am. In traditional Spanish, if someone calls you chismoso, that's like, we're dueling tomorrow. Like, you've just insulted my family's honor, my honor. Like, no, you don't call me chismoso, no chismosa, nothing like that. But like, there's such a pride thing in it of like, so like, yeah. People who make a career of it, you're just like, chismoso. That's a whole.
But it's not a self-identifier.
I mean, if it is, you got some others. It probably is now through American influence, but it didn't used to be.
Notion of shit posting.
Yeah. So this type of person does it, like, it's like a self-identified troll. Well, that's great, but like, it's one of the bad parts of the expedition of Americanisms through Facebook, Liber AF. But I do think there is an allowance that I think, in order to discuss the kind of broadness of Odí and the celebration of that it is everything in life, it is the Odú of the world, that Araye, as the problems of the world, are also connected to this Odú. So I don't want to have my godmother or my godfather sit there and be like, what are you telling people? And I'm just like, this is based on readings, and certainly Abimbola was the one that translated it, and it's a body possessed by witches. That's what are you distracting yourself from?
So perhaps speaking of not being distracted, we can return to our own list of things we've...
What are you saying, Al?
I'm saying that there are beautiful dream-like qualities of inspiration, long walks on short tangents that we're capable of doing. And speaking of dream and the dark reflection on dream, it's apt perhaps to circle back to Obsidian and to consider its lapidary lore, which have two standards that I'm referring to now, of both Lakutos that I'll constantly big up, and also now Francis Young's publication and transcription and translation of the Peterborough lapidary as well, which is 15th century. And yeah, there is a commonality there with Obsidian of the gift of prophecy, but also specifically that those who wear Obsidian shall never have nightmares, or that things that come through dream will not harm you, which is the one that the other gives. So we have this notion not only of not seeing the bad, or not being aware of the bad, or the bad not seeing you, crucially the dream looking back, but also that something is already inherently considered to be coming through as a result of the dream, but the specification is that it can't harm you, right? So this is interesting in terms of are we unable to see misfortune, or is it that in seeing it we are rallied against it and we are able to move forward in an effective way?
You reminded me of just the use of the scrying stone in the triangle of conjuration within Goetic practice. Of I am older, and therefore got exposed to the lovely videos of the What is it? Ordo Templo Astarte.
I love those videos.
They're fun.
Bless him.
Oh, Astra.
I love how Uncle Poke pronounces the term martial art. These operations should be conducted with the same responsibility one would take with a martial art.
With a martial art. It is always in this type of voice. It's a very early California wizened occultist.
He's also got the kind of Troy McClure thing of like he's reading a book and he's like, "Oh, hello there."
Yes,
thing as well.
It's a little bit. It's the Bob Ross of the occult world
in his sports jacket and polo neck.
Now, the growing popularity in that time period of getting rid of the triangle of conjuration as being to visible appearance and advocating for it being a scrying appearance at that time. And several groups in California in that time period, which was my very teenage years, of getting young boys to be the scryers or getting young girls to be the scryers.
Oh, I didn't know that. That's cool.
And those were often connected to the OTO, those people. Which I think of the divide in that time period, you kind of had Wicca and you had OTO. And if you were a ceremony magician, you were involved with the OTO crown. If you were anything witchcraft, you were related to Wicca in some form. And some people cross the streams between the two.
Right.
But this was just early 90s Southern California.
Yeah.
This idea, though, that was very commonly expressed as a rule of thumb when using the scrying mirror, that you could look at your own reflection until the point that you knew the demon was there, and then you had to look away. You could never look at yourself in the eye in the mirror. Because if it looked back, it would come into you. So there was no true safety if you were the scryer. And the only difference was that the young boy or young girl, by virtue of their innocence, cannot be entered in the same way.
There are some interesting notes in looking at why young people, or why virgins specifically. And I think it's not just because purity. I think there is a notion of potential, of that there is a storehouse of potentia, of seed, but of also this blood life force energy pneuma that is present, and that the images themselves kind of, or the formation of the image draws on this virtue of being young and this potential that one like burns parts of one's, I want to say future, like it's your limited time, like you're making some kind of I won't say Faustian,
but that is
like
almost
some kind
tied
of bargain
into the sexual innocence as far as men are concerned, because of you containing that you have a storehouse of Adam inside you, and that each generation does lose some of its virtue because of the distance from Adam, but that you have until the last time, you have those men within you that are going to be in your descent, the children within you. So if you haven't ejaculated at all, that therefore you have the entire storehouse, and it is pure, kept and transmitted from Adam. The minute you start ejaculating, you've started wasting the progeny of Adam, which is a whole other side of it.
So it's less about, again, so back to Onan themselves, less about the inherent wrongness of masturbation or of ejaculation, and more that that it goes against the instruction to Onan. So he's disobedient rather than a pervert, and that you are sapping.
¿Por qué no los dos? Sorry, why not both?
So you're, the notion of sapping strength in much more of a kind of way comparable to some Taoist ideas about retention.
And, of course, all this can be backwards justification and where there's sideways things, but
right.
It's an interesting notion that we can justify this from whatever paradigm we're going through, but the idea of using young people under a certain age. I think people was just on like a half hiccup there. Young people under a certain age. It reminds me of the skull damaru, which I believe is 7-year-old girl and 8-year-old boy skulls that are matched to do the cha drum.
Okay.
So that this idea that even the one that Shiva has in his hands, that each bang of the drum is another incarnation of the universe. That's actually how meaningless our current incarnation is, or another incarnation as a human. If you're going to do like between girl and boy, going back and forth. So Obsidian, within this realm, scrying mirror reflects so that it doesn't see you. I find that interesting, that concept of the demon not seeing you, or you not seeing the demon at the same time. parallel to the idea that the nightmare doesn't see you back.
Right.
That this thing to the realm of dreams, which is a black mirror and not it's not a silver mirror, I guess.
Backed by Mercury.
Yeah, backed by Mercury, or Galadriel's mirror. But Obsidian's, it goes back to its qualities of being reflective, of being sharp, of being cool to the touch exceedingly. It is a glass. It does heat up. There is also a famous obsidian that is probably worth mentioning, just because I know it stokes your own cholera.
Let me turn to my notes.
This is the sound of Al's waterlogged notebook of some people, it's his Rolodex of improper history.
The shit list.
Yeah, he's clearing the rotten offerings against the altar of history.
Oh, I like that.
Clear the putrescence.
No. Well, I don't want to go that far, but I will say that I think it is worth us bearing in mind that the foundation upon which we think or we call the Black Mirror in the British Library, which is called either specifically Dee's Mirror or the Magical Speculum.
It's so sexy.
Yeah, I know, right? May the foundation for this actually being something that Dee used is not as strong as we might like it to be. So this doubt about the veracity of it can really be found in two different kinds of historical lenses that we can look at this thing. The first is that, as far as we're aware, the claim that this is Dee's Mirror is made by Horace Walpole in 1771, and he just makes this claim that, as far as I'm aware, has still not been verified, that this is the black stone into which Dr. Dee used to call his spirits. Right, so we already have this notion of, and I don't know if it's into which the spirit was called. It, to me, rubs me the wrong way. Now, this might be because Walpole himself was not super, versed in what it meant to scry, so I'm prepared to accept that he might not have understood the technicalities of what was going on. But that's not quite what Dee was doing. Expressly, there's a couple of things that the stone does, and this also brings up things that Jan Veenstra talks about in Metamorphosis of Magic about the uniqueness of English almandels in the 14th, 15th century, that the difference between whether the spirit was in the stone or attracted and around the stone. Anyway, so we have an unverified claim which was made so that Walpole could sell it, right? It doesn't turn up, the British Museum doesn't acquire it until 1966, I think, and as I say, still not verified. The other issue is from comparing it to some notes that we do have from Dee, and we're still kind of reliant on Christopher Whitby's excellent work on John Dee's actions with the spirits, where he points out that it's not the same size as the thing that is received in November. It's the 21st of November, 1582, right? So he does say that this stone, which is the one that's delivered by angels, supposedly, and found on the windowsill, he says it's half an inch thick, which suggests that it would be flat like the stone. But not only does the image that he draws of it, because he's a prodigious doodler as well, in Sloane 3191, it looks more like a sphere for a start. Now that's hard to judge, but it also doesn't have the handle. It doesn't have the bit at the top, which you wouldn't have added later, right? You can't. So there's the fact that the stone that people say was delivered by angels and found on the windowsill and was he didn't see it initially because it was dark or because it was see-through, must be the same one. The dimensions don't add up. The stone appearing on the windowsill was described, quote, as big as an egg, most bright, clean and glorious, roundish and less than the palm of my hand. And the black mirror is 22 centimeters high and has a diameter of 18.4 centimeters. I looked up. Right, so it's the half-inch description does fit, but none of the rest of the descriptions do, unless Dee had like massive hands, which I don't think anyone ever commented on.
Zoom in.
Right.
Now, when I was there last year, we did go to, I believe it was the College of Physicians.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah. The Royal College had its D exhibition thing.
And they did have the mirror on loan from the British Museum, and they did not at that time claim that it was the Angel Stone. Mm-hmm. They actually highlighted another one as a possible of the Angel Stones, which is probably from excellent people like you going in and like, it's not that stone! Because they did say there were a number of scrying stones, a number of seeing stones referenced in his work, and therefore he probably had many in possession.
I think the last count I did, the potential when they're describing them is that there's definitely at least 3 that they're using at any one time, and it could be that over the course of it they used up to at least 5.
They seem to acknowledge that there were going to be several, and that there may be even more than was actually said, because if, as we were talking about at the time, because I was there with a bunch of other magically minded people, I don't know why that accent came out. That's how I feel about British magicians. I don't know what that means either.
Nasal.
Yes. It's the Mr. Norrell, Mr. Norrell influence. Okay. But that, if you consecrate 3 things at once under the same consecration ritual, because you actually have 3 of them, that becomes the same stone in your head. Like, there's the possibility exists of, is it multiple or is it one or is it what it is? And it's like, I even had the comparison at that time of like, there's multiple rocks in some of the orishas, but each one is that orisha. Is the stone. And so it's this idea of collective. But that was more of an imposition and a pondering on it, because we're looking at these stones that are purportedly, this one's given by angels, and this one is definitely Aztec obsidian, but there are many floating around from that time period that were Aztec obsidian, because, hello, New World, pirates, let's go. Yeah.
What we can draw on, again, to be the utter cheerleader of it, is the records of scrying and conjuration 20 years before Dee by some of Dee's contemporaries and associates, John Davis and Humphrey Gilbert, their excellent book of the Art of Magic, which not only gives explicit instructions for at least 2 different stones, one of which can be used for all spirits, but like they specifically mention unclean spirits, and one that should be only used for angels. Right, so you already have the clean stuff and the one for doing dirty stuff with. On top of that, they also mention more implicitly that when you are doing your operations, part of the conjurational hierarchy expressed in excellent book and attested to in the scrying journal of their visions, is that they work through the 4 regents on the 4 quarters, the cardinal directions. And they make note that you turn to each of the directions and each of the stones on the wall of your oratory or your, your spirit room, right? So from this kind of line or 2, along with the explicit instructions about what's to be engraved and not engraved on the good stone and the bad stone. And one of them's also like smaller and one of them's bigger as well, which I kind of think about like transferring to the big screen in some kind of way. Along with that, there's also this thing about you turn to the stone on the wall in each of the quarters.
That interests me a lot, just in the sense that like on a hierarchical kick, that if you know a spirit will work under payment, that the stone on the western wall is worked through payment. It's consecrated through payment, who can control anything that comes through it in the west. That's far more practical.
Yeah, when they talk about spirits in the excellent book and more so in the visions, the main thing they detail is where the spirit came from and what direction it went in. That's the main thing. When we get when there's only a line, like it will usually be either that it looked like some weird rabbit with or some weird animal, a monstrous animal of some kind, backwards feet commonly, or weird feet.
Flock of birds.
Or birds without heads, or a bird with wings twitching on the ground without body or any of the intermediary things, just the wings. It's what direction they came from and what direction they go in and how many times they circle around and what they do. You're moving through this ecology of spirit in the visions.
I love the descriptions because it echoes more of my experience with the visions that come from working with these things more than the standard anthropomorphized, let's all put things together, as opposed to like, why is this thing a head and an abdomen floating in front of me?
Right. Or a fleeting glimpse of a hand which seems to be, streaming ribbons after it briefly. Just across, it doesn't turn up and say, hello, I'm here, this is me, very stable, very, very verifying that this is definitely occurring. Very, very, very excellent for you taking a picture and uploading it and tagging me in it.
The idea of the spirit manifesting in the triangle versus the circle is the magician's boundary and the spirit can manifest everywhere else because you haven't changed anything. You just protected yourself from the influence of the demon.
And they expressly say they don't like being contained. They change shape to do that. Interestingly, two of the spirits that change shape, that turn up as birds initially, are explicitly identified as the angels Ancor and Anacor, who, along with Anulos, are the three spirits that are used in so many scrying operations, to the extent that it's almost the opening ritual for scrying. It's the first in a modular series of things in, say, the Cambridge Book of Magic, again another Francis Young translation and publication, that you begin by asking these three spirits or these three angels to appear, and they do nothing but bring the other spirits in, it seems. They may even consecrate the thing itself before you bring in the intermediary spirit to do the thing. So they are a form of, they appear to be like systematically operative spirits or angels to scrying, and expressly angels. They're called angels and called to bring their purity and their clarity to ensure that there is no falsehood.
What's interesting too about the separation between good and bad is it does harken to other things we've already talked about, the walking through the world, being out of it, that an angel doesn't necessarily need to be separated from everything, but it helps its influence come, it is more pure of a message or a pure of a transmission, right, if it is not tainted by that which has come before it. So that is an unclean spirit. In some ways this deals with like everything we talked about with Mary of Egypt, as well as even pertains to the tarot card, the Hermit, of retreating from society, or the great fast that you're doing before doing these conjurations, that the study comes, that the illumination comes. You can turn your page, it's okay. But the idea that the Hermit is a retreat into the self through wandering through the world, the Dioscoridian search for one honest man. And the question is are you the honest man? We should start that search first. And it is a very Gandalf-like figure. It's gray, and there's, in the kind of Rider-Waite symbolism of it's definitely a six-pointed star, which, yes, it's the light of God, but it's also the alchemical shield of all four elements unified. And there's something, I don't know, that needs to be celebrated. It's not just the retreat for the sake of retirement from the world because of being tired of it, but the retreat as distraction and being able to return and join the world when you need to. Right. That you're actually, the hermit here is not a hermit who's in the woods stationary. The hermit is in search of something. And if that thing is found, what then? Right. So it's a little bit of that kind of chariots of fire thing of like, you've just accomplished what you wanted to in life, like what now? And that is always the threat for the hermit of like, if you retreated from the world because of things not being what you needed or what you wanted, how do you keep the search going? How do you keep it going? Or else does that become equally your prison? Right, right. The mercurial aspects of it are fascinating, right? So if we take it as ruled by Virgo, as it normally is, then we have that notion of like order and chastity and imposing this kind of regulation and these kinds of things. But what is left, what's in that Zarathustra, the spake Zarathustra moment, once you achieve your enlightenment or your grand revelation, what you have to go down into the world and impart it. You have to learn Moses has to come off the mountain. Right. You have to take 2 tablets with water, divided. Or 3 and smash one. Right. But you are then having to, the idea of the other hand of the planet being the shadow of the first, that one needs to learn a bunch of Gemini communication skills. One needs to create one's own double in one's students. One needs to pass on that knowledge. And certainly the flowering staff, the staff that he carries, is likened to the staff of Aaron. And you do some lovely serpent tongue stuff with that then. Yeah. But there's so much there. I mean, it's not I think the Hermit is one of those more accessible mysteries, but I think generally it can get not a bad rap, but a contextualized rap that makes it seem like hermitude is bad, as opposed to genuinely retreating into oneself for the night. It's what you do when you dream. It goes back to Obsidian a little bit here. That, like, what is the lantern that you carry? What light do you carry with you into the depths of your dream world? And the cognizance that can come out of that, if we want to carry it into lucid dreaming there, the discipline required for that. Or for some people, no discipline at all. They're just lucky. But there is something to that of it is not just retreat. It is searching. He is not in a prison cell or in a monastic cell somewhere. And it sometimes seems like that is the emphasis that is placed upon him by many modern diviners or many modern adherents to the tarot. And this idea of searching is far more profound. And even the Mary of Egypt thing of retreating into the desert, she's searching even harder now because all she has left is herself to look through. So it becomes the restriction of, it's almost like how every task that expands to fill the time allotted, every search expands to fill the space allotted. So like, it's just, if I only have myself to search through, I'm going to start to find whole new aspects of myself that I can't run from. And the Hermit has this really interesting dynamic relationship with that. And certainly with Virgo there is the fruitful harvest born by the Virgin, right? And you have the relationship with Spica there as a fixed star. But the idea, again, intactness or completion apart from a man. So we can take both definitions of virgin here as woman who does not need a man to be complete, as well as pre-sexualized woman, both as containing more potential and less distracted by the attentions of the outside world.
Right. I think about the cultivated seed and that notion of initiation as seed.
Or the Vestal Virgins of tending the fire, of keeping the hearth burning, and this notion and this carryover into abbesses and nunneries of Catholicism, and this tending the fire, going back to the Bridget and things like that. So returning to Bridget, I mean going back like she precedes it, though in Bridget myth, yes, I'm sure she precedes everything. I think what's interesting, carrying off of Hermit, we had planned, this was an episode that we kind of planned to kind of tailor through all these other things. I do think it's worth hitting on Tiresias just for a little bit.
Well, yeah, I mean, I guess depending on how historical we want to be about saying literary, historical literary, there is a history of him being in a literary tradition, which is kind of a cheat of why don't English departments and history departments talk to each other more? The necromancy of Homer, as it's famously called, is based around Odysseus attempting to raise a spirit, specifically the spirit of Tiresias, to give him information, a blind and dead seer who's called forth and to whom blood is poured into the pit, from whence we get an awful lot of the reconstruction of Hellenic necromancy, and the sword is held over the bloody pit to prevent other spirits getting at that blood until Tiresias turns up, which is an interesting version of less compelling and more ensuring that the circle is not broken until one wants it to be, until it is broken by
the feast is laid for he who was invited.
Right.
And until he has had his fill. But the idea in a lot of necromantic traditions that what is left over is free for grabs, have fun. Land spirits at all. The red feast, the white feast, gods, demons, friends, lovers, enemies.
That yod of the Hermit being the one that gets through the oven wall as well interests me, to the center, to the fruitful growing of the seed into a person thing.
That whole thing.
That whole humaning. So we have a blind seer, which obviously is its own kind of trope, eyes in the other world, and is that other version of a leg or both legs planted somewhere else, that you are not quite here, that you may have second or even third sight.
In the origin of Tiresias, he's not born blind.
Oh yeah, that's a very good point.
To my memory, it is actually a gift that they take his eyes because of another slight that was committed against him. And because of this, his eyes are taken and he's now given the gift of prophecy. Oh, that old guy.
That old thing.
Who is, like, let's face it, is the bro of the Pantheon.
Well, he is and he isn't. I mean, he's also transformed into a woman for 7 years.
No, I don't mean Tiresias. I mean Apollo.
Oh, Apollo. Apollo's
totally the frat brother of the whole thing. He's like, he's very Jersey Shore. He just is, I don't know if it's because of virtue of being the young boy, but he's very, you've got like uppity granola Artemis and, this kind of drunken party pretty boy who everybody, male, female, and plant wants to sleep with. And, you know, the only thing that outdoes him is his little brother, Hermit.
Tricky little brother, right?
Yeah, who steals. And he's like, well, that's not on the plate. You can't steal. I was given that, you know. But it's interesting. It's the prophecy side of it is still harder for me to wrestle, but, you know, I'm not as delving into Greek things. I understand the Python aspect and that light itself is connected to knowledge. But it's interesting that this poetry, beauty, and all these things is there.
So there's an interesting thing about what the ghosts can see as well, that in the giving of the blood, because Tiresias is such a great seer, he can see Odysseus, the one summoning him, but his own, like Odysseus's mother can't until she's drunk the blood. So there's not just, so it's again this thing about not just like you being able to see the spirits, but the spirits being able to see you, right, and you being able to interact with the dead, and them know that you're doing that is really interesting to me as well. And again, another one of those invisibility is operative spirit work,
like turning the mirror away from you slightly, or not looking at the demon in the eyes when it appears in the mirror. Of like, it can't see you unless it makes complete eye contact, but it knows something's there. The call is coming from inside the house.
Right. I think about those smoking mirror mysteries around, Gysin that's doing the staring into the mirror thing and just being handed joint after joint after joint. If we're talking like, slightly, at least apparently facile comparisons of a smoking mirror, but the idea of eventually there just being nothing, right? That you keep staring and talk about that and stripping away ego kind of stuff. But the idea of the horror being either the horror of the absence of yourself or the absence of self at all, or a creative void from which everything can spout, and we can go all capital Q quantum about the thing.
That the various beliefs about using eyes liquefied as the rub for seeing stones and things like that. Also interesting just to note that like the pupil is a black mirror, and that something appears upside down in it, which also reckons it to the underworld of where things walk upside down. And it's an interesting additional thing there, that could you stare into the eyes of a magical partner and invoke each other's dead, or invoke your own dead through your eyes and see what's said and done. Certainly fruitful to think about. Perhaps foolhardy to actually do. That's up to you and your gods, or godparents. But yeah, I think Tiresias is an interesting one, just because there's so many. Again, what we've talked about. You have an example from literature that truly inspires, gives an idea at least about popular notions of what necromancy was, if not the actual technology itself. So it becomes that you can argue about, well, we have no idea if this was actually how things were done. But at a certain point, it becomes the discovery of witchcraft principle, right? That like, even if he completely made up everything that he did in that book, now people are going to go, oh, that's how you do it. And it becomes standardized after that point. Yeah. How is it that Masonic lodges all practice very similar things now? Because of exposés done on certain lodges that then people said, but we're not going to be considered legitimate unless we follow that horrible version that was done there.
The Asson.
Yeah, so... exactly. The Asson of Haiti, of not all houses being Asson lineages, and then anthropologists going in there and reporting on a few Asson lineages, and then everyone going, wait a minute, I'm not legitimate now if I don't have this thing that only exists in this small area, so now everybody's got to have that too. Right. And
the difference there between outsider anthropologists getting to define what insiders have to do to be seen as legitimate or proper, I think can be distinguished from stories and drama utilizing the popular conception of folklore of the figure of the witch, of what necromancers do, of what spirits are.
It can, but I don't know if it's as separate as my Western mind wants to make it at first, for the reason that the traditions do have an inherent economic need to make sure that they're legit, but also that popular conceptions of what witchcraft are now do influence authors as how to present to their audiences. Yes. So the Salem aesthetic, the TV show, is because the TV show doesn't seem to influence the town's aesthetic of things that I know of. But the TV show has a certain idea, and that certain people are starting to kind of go after that visual richness of things, and like certain spell types and things that are going there, and people looking for what they see on TV. Thank God we're past the Charmed era. However, those things do influence a lot of styles in a very interesting. People want that witchcraft, and you go, well, real witchcraft requires you to go through this degree graded system for 20 years. Okay, well, that's that system,
but many of these, meandering tributaries, like merge again, and that which is taken off in a weird angle because someone produces a play in which witches act in a particular way that then becomes used as actual as having no access to anything else.
Yeah.
And like, well, all right, we'll try this, see if this works.
Yeah.
So that this notion of not just doing it because it's pop culture and you're a chaos iconoclast, but because that's all there is. Right?
Yeah, it's what we're talking about exactly with this, that taking literature and looking at it as the example, the only example that we have, unless you want to resurrect some or necromanticize your experiments into looking at calling up the magicians the goists that were doing these things. And then, of course, that's filtered through your own brain and expectations and lets you know all spirits lie. Especially when there's money or offerings involved.
And these are the things that we navigate, and that particularly interests me about the history of necromancy and the necromancy of history is, as Peter Gray says, witches should know both the power of myth and history and not confusing them. Yes.
And also, it's just the idea between history is never true.
Right.
It is this idea of sacrificing it on the altar of truth. Like, it doesn't exist. History is an account and an interpretation.
It's digging a hole that gets bigger of all of the ways that we can be informed, be educatedly ignorant.
It's the diviner's nightmaric web. It's just so many things start connecting to everything, and it becomes so but it's almost like trying to psychologize the past of like, what motivated this and what motivated this, what motivated this. Whereas myth is true. Myth is inherently true in the sense of it conveys truth. That's the point of myth. It's not quantifiable. It's not logos. It's mythos. And
it's kairos.
It's so we have used it as a devalued word, but it is the opposite.
Right.
That myth becomes embodied in logos and therefore is more finite. But there is no inherent, when we treat myth as logos, this is our problem. When we start to say, well, there's this conflicting chapters in Genesis of what this is, then we have to have Midrash that goes in and says, well, this is the reason between these two chapters. Not saying that's a specific example, but the idea that in this Oudh and in this Oudh, Yemaya is married to Ogun here and she's married to Obatala here. She couldn't have been married to both. Oh, yes, she could have. It's a myth. And it's codified here, and she lived multiple lifetimes anyway, so let's get it, this is it's Greek myth of Hecate's parents are something here and there's something else here.
Right.
Well, they're both true because they're both myths. It's fine. What's the mythic reality that's trying to present?
Right. It's the signification.
Yeah, and certainly pleased. And it's each person tells slightly different truths in their story of their lifetimes as they go on. This is part of who it is. We shape our identities based on the current history. We tell ourselves on the one we remember, just as we know with all memorizing and all memory itself, not memorizing. But the Mandela effect that does happen, that we start to remember alternate histories that never existed, because we've also told ourselves alternate histories that never existed so many times that the brain remembers that as the truth and starts to influence us very subtly into other things. So it's the thing of, it's the excuse when someone starts having a breakdown, we're like, but I did do that thing. It's like, I believe you think you did that thing. We just know you didn't. So it becomes a very hard road to walk. I think, just summing it up, I don't think we're going to get to dirt sorcery because we kind of talked about mirror magic, which was kind of cool.
Yeah, that was nice.
I think the thing that strikes me about Aloeswood and Oudh, just to kind of bring it back, because this kind of touched on it with Mary of Egypt, but it has the same sense of blackening to make something profoundly beautiful. So Mary of Egypt is blackened by the sun, by her own sins, and then exudes this sweet fragrance of saintliness. Aloeswood is infested, I believe, by a parasite, and as a reaction creates a resin that makes the wood one of the most fragrant, most beautiful, and most expensive substances in the world. And it is a scent still somewhat unknown in the West. There are a few, it is becoming more popular in the last few years. In fact, if you're looking for an American Oudh house, House of Orpheus is doing a lot of really gorgeous Oudh-based scents. And I'm a I'm not going to tell everyone my favorites, but I'm a huge fan of gin, seraph, and charuto, personally. And the Cyprian perfume is not an oud based, but it's an interesting smell.
I like the Verum one, which I was very kindly gifted, because it's based on the ingredients for, I believe, I want to say the circle consecration. It's based on one of the consecratory incenses for working Verum. And there have been several occasions when, along with burning those things, I've been told to wear that for doing particular things. So the idea of like, what is the circle that is cast around you? What is your aura? Well, your olfactory aura can be very carefully cast.
Good quality oud is extremely expensive. It is a traditional thing to burn in many Muslim and Arab houses. It is the smell is intoxicating. It is something that matures with age. It is, again, it's not something that most Western noses are used to experiencing, so they always go, what is that smell? You tell them, like, what is that?
I love this notion of it being something that the plant does as a reaction, right, rather than what it does naturally, or what the say the parasites or the bugs do themselves. And this puts me in mind of a lot of the things about herbalism and the pharmacokinetics of intoxicants and quote unquote entheogens, or just entheogens, fair enough. That it's a poke, yeah, unquote. It's a poke of your brain meats and your soul parts to do a thing. It's a prompt, right? That whole notion of LSD leaves your system within an hour, and the rest of it is all you like processing and doing what.
Whereas mushrooms rewrite your brain.
Right.
Mushrooms are better. That was whispered. Mushrooms are better.
But the point of to do a less kind of like sensationalist example, that like you are doing, with herbal medicine, often you are doing something to prompt the body to do it. It's not, you're not placing all your faith in the materia to course around your body, putting band-aids on things and spontaneously generating health. You are rebalancing.
You're reestablishing an equilibrium.
Right, and you are, right, that eukrasia, that good mixture. And crucially, you are not, the plant isn't doing that, your body's doing that. The body is seeking the homeostasis and the equilibrizing tendency in a dynamic system. Right, it's
why if you eat crap food, it's never going to work. Right. It is interesting to compare it to something like gall.
Another blackening,
but something similar. The tree responds in a certain way, creates a gall, and then we use that primarily to make something like ink, which is very important for many of the literati magicians of the world. I find that interesting too, this reaction of a plant, the sacredness of gall itself, both for cursing because of its blackness and the attack of the insect, but can that be transmuted into something else? Similar to Aloeswood here, that the infestation becomes something that exudes sweetness. Right. And that through giving that back to fire, back to deity, in that way, because it's a burnt offering, there is something profound in this.
It's calcined.
Yeah.
It's purified.
That it's made white through its blackness, and it's offering mediation by fire. Right. So Mary of Egypt's breath is sweet once again. I think that's a pretty good place to end.
Yeah, I think so too.
Thanks for bearing with us. Thank you for the wait. It has been a very busy February and March. Yeah. But glad to be recording again, and we'll see how this experiment of recording on the Saint's Day, as opposed to worrying about getting it out for the Saint's Day, goes. But we should be back for the Feast of St. George. Yeah. By April 23rd. So thank you so much. And anything else, Aloysius?
I can't think of anything in particular. I mean, we'll fill the show notes hopefully as well. At some stage, we are still in the process of working out how to do those. But we thank you for bearing with us, and we hope that in putting those out, we'll be able to inspire listening to it again and getting more things out of.
Foster discussion and go from there. Again, look for us on www.radiofreegolgotha.com, and please check us out on Facebook. We do post other things besides just the links to the episodes there. Right. And please feel free to discuss anything you find on a link there. And if there's something you think that we should be reading or be looking out for, we are always interested in expanding our libraries, knowledge, and discourse on many topics.
Absolutely.
So thank you so much. Happy Feast of Saint Mary of Egypt. We are in the last week of Lent. So if you get this before Holy Week ensues, may all your passions be bloody.